Welcome to Sky Team's People First with Morag Barrett.
Welcome to this week's episode of People First. And my guest this week is a friend and colleague, Stephen George. Stephen is a seasoned voice actor, audio professional, broadcast producer, and brings more than a decade of experience in the field. In fact, Eric Ruby and I spent many hours narrating You, Me, We with Stephen's help, and it was such a fabulous experience. I've just completed the narration for the second edition of Cultivate, the Power of Winning Relationships. More on those in a minute. However, Stephen at Twin Flames is directly involved with all audiobook projects, from setting up discovery calls to direct live recording sessions, to uploading the finished audiobooks for purchase. He wants all authors to know that his process is not about perfection, but about getting it right. And there is a big difference. Well, Stephen, welcome to People First.
Thanks, Morag. So happy to be here. And you've basically made the story already, so I'm not sure why I need to be here.
Oh, I just want to listen to your dulcet tones. And we're going to get on to listening and your ability to listen deeply in due course. But I'm going to start this episode, as I do with all. I just want to know your origin story. So when you were a wee lad, what did you want to be when you imagined growing up and adulting?
Sure. So I would say when I was much, much younger, elementary age or so, I think I wanted to be a firefighter, help people. Save the day, be the hero, all of those wonderful things that we think of. And then once I got into high school, grades 9 through 12 or so, that sadly changed. However, to what was more, I think, exciting for me at the time was to be a journalist.
Oh, so you enjoy writing?
Yes. And in fact, my senior year of high school, I interned at my hometown newspaper and then turned that into a guest writing position on occasion throughout my college years.
Yeah, I think I'm showing my age there. I suddenly thought, why did I assume that to be a journalist, one has to write? Because there are so many different versions of journalism and reporting on stories and insights now available to us.
Sure.
But writing, obviously, you were there in the newspaper at school. And so what brought you then to what you do today?
Well, I think there were several steps along the way and in sort of a linear path eventually, in that I started in my hometown newspaper writing and was doing that in college. While I was also in college, I was learning how to be a television news reporter. I was taking some courses and shifted into an internship at a local television station there, where I then transitioned, once I had my degree, into a morning news producer where I was writing the news, which also meant that I was talking about story placement, how long they were going to be, who was going to say it, what was going to be said, graphics, the whole 9 yards. So really sort of, I guess, planning and project management on a daily basis as well from that standpoint.
So what is it that goes into making a compelling news story or communicating any message in those small, finite pieces of time? What advice do you have for leaders listening to this that you've picked up through your career?
Yes. For my opinion, I think, is a little different than others in that I try to let the facts speak for themselves, whether that be numbers or the person's perspective, right, that we were interviewing at the time. That's the story, not necessarily what was said, or rather how it was said, I guess. And for me, what captures attention versus what translates is very different. I keep saying we, I found it at the time that sometimes presenting news wasn't always what people wanted in terms of ratings. And so that was a little difficult to swallow sometimes in terms of what people wanted. And always from a local standpoint, weather always led, right? Like if there was snow, especially in North Carolina, central North Carolina at the time, where I was working, weather situations was always what was going to lead. So we just, played into that a little bit and then allowed the other stories of the day to give center stage as much as possible in terms of, what was happening in the local governments and school systems and things like that.
So now you help authors to tell their story
Yes.
in the recording and narration of their books. So let's start with the basics. If we have an author listening to this who's thinking about doing their first audiobooks,
Mhm.
what's one thing they should be thinking about that may not be yet on their list? And what's one thing to avoid when it comes to recording?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing to do that I always talk to my authors about is please prep. And from a prep standpoint, meaning like read your book out loud, spend some time, whether this is at the beginning of the process that you're just kind of writing and haven't sent it to an editor yet, or if you're kind of down the line and think you're getting closer to publishing and want to record your audiobook, definitely spend some time reading your book out loud because it's going to help you determine, those long sentences. And
Mhm.
because usually we'll have authors come back and say, why did I write that sentence that way? Right? Because writing is very different than speaking to people or having a conversation like we are today. And so, depending upon the way that you want to present your information, really that can change a lot. And we work with our authors consistently about, when you're recording your audiobook, is that how you want to say that? And the nice thing
Mhm.
about audiobooks is they don't have to be word for word with the print book. Nobody is going back and checking if, line by line, if you said everything that's there. And sometimes it opens up opportunities for authors to add like little side notes or asides or little anecdotes occasionally, um, that is unique to the audiobook experience. And one of the worst things I think is to not practice. So I think they're one and the same because if you didn't practice what you're going to record that particular day, then and it's going to sound like you're reading off the page.
Mhm.
And are you doing your audience a service when you do that? They want the story from you directly, but that performance piece of it really plays a role in all of this. And you and Eric and Ruby have all done a fantastic job with You Me We, and then you obviously continuing that with Cultivate second edition. It's a very personal experience when the author knows where they're going with the content, because it is one thing to know yes, you wrote the book, we all know the content, but being able to speak it is just a little different.
Yeah, and I think I hit all of those points for good, bad, and indifferent throughout our time together, because reading in your head, there was
Mhm.
names and words just to enunciate. There's
Mhm.
a difference between an English pronunciation and an American pronunciation, which you caught me on, and then I had to make a call. So,
Mhm.
being British, that one out, though I think I threw in a few Zs. You'll have to listen to the book and let
That's
me
right.
know, audience, if you can hear the difference. But I know going into it, there is that assumption, well, I wrote it, I should be able to read it. But of course, hearing your own voice out loud with the headphones on, etc., it brings a different timbre to the, I don't even know,
Mhm.
is that how you pronounce it? It just sounds weird in your own head when you hear your voice out loud. And then we can be more critical. So how do you keep your
Yeah.
authors engaged and not just throwing up their hands and going, I can't do this?
Yes, we absolutely are our own worst critics, and I lived that through my other work as a voice actor. I had to get over that hump myself, just getting used to hearing myself on recording versus what I think I sound like. And so, in terms of keeping people, engaged, that part of our process at Twin Flames is lends itself more to that, where we have somebody listening real time when the authors are recording. They are never alone in the process. And we talk about our authors, or talk to our authors rather, about how an audiobook needs to be sort of a one-on-one intimate conversation, like you're there in the room with someone. And I think our process just lends itself in that they have that person in real time in that process. And so if they have questions about how to handle a chart or a graph or just bullet points or whatever in general, they've got somebody to kind of bounce ideas off in real time. What do you think of this? And it sort of opens the space up, not just into I got to focus on what I'm reading in front of me, but still kind of a thoughtful process and real time kind of processing in that way that I think is really beneficial for the authors.
So I want to go a little deeper on the listening piece, because one of the things that blew my mind during our time together is that you weren't just listening to the words, which, let's face it, I know for me can easily become wah, 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 wah. And even if the book is interesting, listening to what is being said is one level, but you were going deeper. You were listening, well, for the ice making machine going off and creating background noise that I couldn't hear, so we had to switch that off. The plane going overhead. I was sitting in a basement recording, but you heard it. But also you were listening to the, oh, you ran out of breath, or yeah, you just fluffed your words a little bit. So I think many of the leaders listening will have been told at some point, either at home or at work, that they need to listen more. So what comes to mind for you in terms of how is it that you are able to listen so deeply, so intently for those extended periods of time?
I think for me, it's just my background. Like my whole goal, like as I mentioned, being in high school, was I wanted to be able to tell other people's stories. And that means I have to listen to them. I have to, and not just to respond. Like I really want to hear them. And yes, we talk about, as you mentioned, the planes and whatever the microphone's going to pick up, because it will pick it up, as you have heard. But for me, I get to spend time with the author in their content. And so for me, it's a constant question of asking myself, if I was the author, is that how I would want to say that? Because they have the idea in mind, but they're focused on those words in front of them. So as a director, we get to say, okay, yes, you said it, but then ask the follow-up. Is that really how you want to present that information? And then sometimes it can be, I actually play it back for them the way they said it. Other times it's, I provide a suggestion, hey, why don't you say it more, finishing, or yes, you said it out of breath, and usually the author starts to pick up on those things as we go down that road in the recording sessions. They start to notice and want to make their own changes. So it's definitely a partnership in that way, in that, yes, I can sort of lead the conversation until they're like, oh, I get it. And they start to think for themselves, and it starts to become part of the process as well. Generally, though, for me, it's just I want to hear what they have to say and make sure the way they want to portray this information comes across in a professional way that they can be proud of.
I'm curious, are you as an effective listener in all aspects of your life, or is it a lights, camera, action? When you're in the studio, you can do it. Are you consistent elsewhere too?
Ask my wife; she'd say no.
Yeah, I was going to say you're asking the wrong person.
But I think my personal life also comes into it as well, because my wife and I have been married for almost 17 years, and we have 2 kids, and our daughter has epilepsy. And so that requires a different level of understanding on her part, but also a different level of us kind of explaining things too, which I think helps me in the directing arena, because I could say something plainly to her brother and he's going to get it right. I'm going to just rattle it off. But with her, she may, kind of look at me like, well, what do you mean? What are you asking? And so asking it in a different way. So I think that added level of patience just from being a parent, it comes into play here, certainly. And it is hard for me when I listen to audiobooks, just as a consumer, in terms of, just being that customer of a client, like, oh, just turning it off. Because at some point I do want to enjoy it as well. Like, I don't want it to be work. I want it to just sit back and, yep, I'm hearing exactly what you're saying, and just move forward and not critique along the way.
In the studio, how do you remain focused when you feel your mind starting to wander? What's your tactic for coming back and being so deeply present?
I think for me, we build in breaks with our authors. Sometimes the author will request it up front, so I take advantage of that. Others, I'll say, maybe about an hour in or so, hey, before we move into this next section, let's take a couple of minutes, right? Let me go up and walk around for a minute, or go grab a glass of water, something along those lines, just as a kind of a reset. And when we were recording You, Me, We, I was recording the three of you back to back in that week of time that we sort of had.
Mhm.
So the three of you were able to catch a break, whereas me, I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to ask, right? So be upfront about it and say, yes, 6 hours of recording a day is a lot. So I'm going to need a little bit of extra time that I wouldn't normally ask other authors, where I'm just, doing 1-2 hour session with them.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that we underestimated, is just how long it takes to read out loud
Mm-hmm.
average size book, especially when you do want to re-clarify or restate
Yeah.
pages, or there are fluffs. Let's face it, I have a blooper roll that would make you laugh. Well, maybe I'll have to put it out there and see if it makes people laugh. But all of that takes time, and it takes
Yes.
patience, and
Yes.
all of us have to be all in to want to do it. I'm curious, in terms of your career. I mean, from listening now to You, Me, We, and Cultivate, that relationships are at the heart of the work we do here at Sky Team. So what role have relationships, and professional relationships specifically, played in your success?
So I think for me, it's just honestly, in these recording sessions with the authors recording their books, I get to learn a lot every day. And it was it's so funny that I've been with Twin Flames for about 4 years now, and counting. And before I ever started working for them, I just had a random conversation with my wife once, where I said, I'm not spending a lot of time reading. I probably should. And I could tell you on one hand how many books I'd read for years.
Mm-hmm.
Big old goose egg.
Oh, yeah.
And so taking this job at Twin Flames, where I started out as a director, completely changed that. I mean, I was now reading dozens of books a year now, because going through the sessions, we finish hours and hours and hours of books every year. And 30 plus books a year later, I can say, yeah, I'm reading a lot now. But within those sessions, though, I get so much time with brilliant people. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about my job, is I'm never the smartest person in the room, virtually or otherwise, right? I'm always learning something. And so that helps me stay engaged as well, because there's a lot happening out in the corporate space that I would not otherwise be aware of. My wife has her own work stories and her leadership roles that she has within the organization she's been in, that understanding piece of, why she having to do things that way, so it helps me become a more well-rounded person, both professionally, relationally, personally, all of that. And so I bring all of that every time I come into a session now, with everything that's come before me.
So curiosity, by the sound of things. And even listening to you there, I hadn't really thought through the fact that you listen to the live recording, but there's also the editing hours of re-listening to
Mhm.
everything that goes on behind the scenes. So you're not just listening or reading the book once, you're reading it 2 or 3 times throughout the process. So your goose egg of 0 has now
Right.
add
Yeah.
zeros to the end of the number.
Absolutely. Yes. Mhm.
So as
Be
you
careful
think,
what you wish for.
yeah, be careful what you wish for. So what's one thing you do thoughtfully and intentionally to nurture the relationships that you're making with authors, but also within the industry and for your own career?
I think it's just really being intentional about the time that I have, not just within the recording sessions, which helps tremendously, right? Because we're engaged one-on-one. There's no other distractions available unless you forget to turn your phone off, right? So that one-on-one time, where I just say, we'll get to have a laugh in the middle of a recording session about, what was said, or what happened right before coming into the doorway, or so for me, it's just the one-on-one relationships that I get to build with the authors. And then, we can continue on via email, or just general follow-ups. Hey, how have you been? And then at that point, it starts there in that role, but then, I'll follow them on social media and like their posts or comment, or, something along that line. So it starts very small and then just sort of grows. And for me, that's very fulfilling from that
Okay.
standpoint.
I love it. Very pragmatic. Where can people who are listening to this conversation learn more about your work and the work of Twin Flame Studios?
Sure. So our website is the first place to start. It's Twin Flames with an S on the end, studios with an S on the end.com. Also on LinkedIn, Instagram, Instagram's at Twin Flame Studios. And for me, I'm at Stephen George VO. I don't post as much on Instagram anymore as I used to, but you'll still find occasional things there. And LinkedIn is really kind of where we spend our time, and because that's where our authors are. I mean, we are in the nonfiction space for the most part, and that's where our authors are as well, trying to build their brand, so to speak.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure all of that information is included in the show notes. Stephen, it has been a pleasure both talking with and listening with you. Thank you for joining me on People First.
Thank you, Morag. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining Morag today. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. If you learned something worth sharing, share it. Cultivate your relationships today when you don't need anything before you need something. Be sure to follow Sky Team and Morag on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any ideas about topics we should tackle, interviews we should do, or if you yourself would like to be on the show, drop us a line at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and remember, business is personal and relationships matter. We are your allies.